The dining room was silent except for the faint ticking of the grandfather clock that had belonged to my late husband, James. I sat at the head of the table, a cup of Earl Grey steady in my hands, while my daughter-in-law, Vanessa, leaned back in her chair with a smirk carved into her perfectly painted face. The autumn light filtered through the bay windows, casting a golden glow that felt cruelly at odds with the coldness permeating the room. "Pack your bags, Margaret," she sneered, sliding a stack of papers toward me. "Daniel signed the house over. This place is mine now. You're nothing here." Her voice dripped with victory, as if she had already moved her designer clothes into the closets I had filled with memories of raising my son. My Daniel sat beside her, silent, his eyes fixed on the tablecloth, too ashamed to meet my gaze. The son I had raised alone since he was 5, after James's heart attack left me a young widow with a mortgage and dreams in shambles. I sipped my tea calmly, letting the bitter taste anchor me to the present. For years, everyone mistook my quietness for weakness. Vanessa certainly did. My friend Grace, sitting to my right, placed her hand over mine, her fingers trembling with indignation. "You can't possibly," Grace began, but Vanessa cut her off with a wave of her manicured hand. "It's all legal," Vanessa declared, tapping her red nail against the documents. "Signed and notarized. As of today, this house belongs to Daniel and me. And since we need the space for our future family, you'll need to find somewhere else to live." The cruelty wasn't in the words alone, but in how she savored them, rolling each syllable around her mouth like expensive wine. 5 years of subtle digs and passive-aggressive comments had culminated in this moment of open hostility. I set my teacup down with practiced precision. "Is this true, Daniel?" My son finally looked up, his father's eyes staring back at me from a face that suddenly seemed like a stranger's. "Mom, we've talked about this. You need something smaller, more manageable. This house is too big for just you." "We talked about nothing," I replied, my voice softer than I intended. "You and Vanessa decided. There's a difference." The house in question wasn't just any building. It was the Victorian on Maple Street that James and I had purchased as newlyweds, the place where I'd raised our son through scraped knees and broken hearts, the home I'd fought to keep after James died by taking on 2 jobs while still helping Daniel with his homework every night. Every floorboard held a memory. Every wall had witnessed our struggles and triumphs. "It's for the best," Daniel continued, his voice gaining the rehearsed quality of someone repeating someone else's words. "You'll be more comfortable in a retirement community." Grace gasped. "Daniel Lawson! Your mother is only 53. Vanessa's smile only widened. "The papers are already filed. We found a lovely assisted living facility in Putnam County. Very quaint." I looked at my tea, watching the light dance across its amber surface, thinking of all the nights I'd sat alone in this dining room, balancing checkbooks and skipping meals to ensure Daniel could have everything he needed. The soccer uniforms, the college tuition, the wedding that Vanessa had insisted needed to cost more than what most people make in a year. "When would you like me to leave?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "We've already paid your first month's rent," Vanessa said, sliding another brochure toward me. "They're expecting you next weekend." Daniel at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Mom, it's really nice there. They have activities and it's an hour away from everything I know," I finished for him. Grace stood up, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "This is outrageous. Margaret built this life brick by brick after your father died, Daniel. How dare you?" Daniel flinched, but Vanessa remained unmoved. "The decision is made. This house is too valuable to waste on one person. We could sell it tomorrow for over $1 million. And there it was, the truth behind the facade of concern. Not my welfare, but the value of the property that sat on 2 acres in one of Westchester County's most desirable neighborhoods. "I understand," I said, rising slowly from my chair. "If you'll, excuse me, I need a moment." I walked with measured steps toward James's study, the one room in the house that remained exactly as it had been the day he died. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, allowing myself exactly 3 deep breaths before crossing to his desk. From the bottom drawer, I removed a leather portfolio that had been sealed since James's death. Inside was a document I had hoped never to need, created during a period when I'd first noticed Vanessa's interest in Daniel seemed to coincide with his promotion at the investment firm. James had been a cautious man, and in his final months, as his heart weakened, he had insisted we visit his old college friend, Rick Palmer, who had become a respected estate attorney. "Always protect yourself, Maggie," James had whispered to me as we left Rick's office. The world isn't always kind to women alone. I tucked the portfolio under my arm and returned to the dining room, where Vanessa was already discussing paint colors with a subdued Daniel. I'm thinking ivory for the master bedroom, she was saying, and that old-fashioned wallpaper in the hallway has to go. Actually, I interrupted, before you redecorate, there's something we should discuss. I pulled out my cell phone and dialed a number I rarely used but had memorized nonetheless. Who are you calling? Vanessa asked, her smile faltering for the first time. Rick Palmer, I replied. James's attorney. I think we need some clarity about the ownership of this house. That won't be necessary, Vanessa said quickly. The transfer is already complete. Nevertheless, I said as the phone rang, I'd like to be thorough. As Rick answered, I watched Vanessa's face carefully. There was something flickering behind her eyes now, the faintest shadow of doubt. Rick, it's Margaret Lawson. I'm afraid I need your help with something urgent. Could you come to the house? Yes, it's about the deed. Thank you. I hung up and returned to my seat, pouring myself a fresh cup of tea as calmly as if we were discussing the weather. What deed? Daniel asked, looking between Vanessa and me. The original deed to this house, I explained. The one with the special provision James insisted on. What provision? Vanessa demanded, her voice rising slightly. I smiled, taking another sip of my tea. We'll discuss it when Rick arrives. In the meantime, would anyone like some scones? I baked them fresh this morning. The clock continued to tick, marking the seconds until everything would change. And for the first time in years, I wasn't counting the moments with dread, but with the quiet certainty that sometimes justice arrives exactly when it's needed most. Rick Palmer arrived 45 minutes later, his silver hair disheveled from the wind, carrying a worn leather briefcase that looked as if it had seen decades of legal battles. I met him at the door, grateful for the familiar face amidst the storm brewing in my dining room. Margaret, he said warmly, embracing me briefly. I came as soon as I could. James would be turning in his grave if he knew what was happening. Thank you for coming, Rick, I whispered. I wasn't sure if the provision would hold after all these years. Rick's eyes twinkled with something between amusement and determination. A good legal document is like fine wine, Margaret. It only gets stronger with age. We entered the dining room together, where Grace had remained seated in solidarity, while Daniel and Vanessa spoke in hushed, urgent tones. Vanessa straightened immediately when she saw Rick, adopting a professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. Mr. Palmer, she greeted him, extending her hand. I don't believe we've had the pleasure. I'm Vanessa Lawson, Daniel's wife. Rick barely touched her fingers before releasing them. I know who you are, Mrs. Lawson. I attended your wedding, though I doubt you'd remember an old man like me among all those celebrities you invited. I suppressed a smile. Rick had always been direct to the point of bluntness. Now, he continued, opening his briefcase on the table, I understand there's some confusion about the ownership of this property. Vanessa's smile tightened. No confusion. Daniel inherited his father's half of the house when he turned 25, as stipulated in James's will. Yesterday, Margaret signed over her half to us. The paperwork has been filed. Rick raised an eyebrow at me. Did you sign anything, Margaret? No, I said quietly. I most certainly did not. Daniel looked confused. But Vanessa said, I said it was taken care of. Vanessa interrupted quickly. The lawyer said it was just a formality since the house would eventually pass to Daniel anyway. Rick pulled out a document from his briefcase, its edges slightly yellowed with age. Let me be clear. Margaret Lawson has not signed any transfer of deed. But more importantly, Daniel's inheritance of his father's portion came with conditions that I believe you've overlooked. The room grew silent as Rick unfolded the document and placed it on the table. This is the original deed to 47 Maple Street, modified 20 years ago when James Lawson knew his heart condition was worsening. It contains a specific clause regarding ownership transfer. Vanessa reached for the document, but Rick gently moved it away from her grasp. Allow me to read the relevant section. Upon the death of James Lawson, his half ownership transfers to his son, Daniel James Lawson, to be held in trust until his 25th birthday. However, control of the entire estate remains solely with Margaret Lawson until her passing, or until she willingly relinquishes such control in writing, witnessed by the family attorney. Any transfer of ownership without meeting these conditions is void. Daniel's face paled. I don't understand. Dad left me half the house. He left you half the ownership, son, Rick clarified. But not the control. Your father wanted to ensure your mother would never be displaced from her home, regardless of circumstances that might arise in the future. Vanessa's composure cracked like thin ice. That's impossible. The new deed is invalid, Rick finished for her. Any document purporting to transfer control of this property without Margaret's written consent, witnessed by me specifically, violates the terms of the original deed. Grace let out a low whistle of admiration. James always was a smart man. This is ridiculous, Vanessa sputtered, her cheeks flushing with anger. Daniel, tell them this is ridiculous. But Daniel was staring at the document, recognition dawning in his eyes. I remember now. Dad mentioned something about making sure Mom was always taken care of. I was just a teenager. I didn't understand what he meant. Rick nodded solemnly. Your father foresaw that Margaret might someday be vulnerable. He loved her too much to leave anything to chance. So what does this mean exactly? Daniel asked, looking between Rick and me. It means, I said, finding my voice stronger than it had been in years, that this house remains under my control. You cannot sell it, mortgage it, or evict me from it without my consent, which I have not given and do not intend to give. The color drained from Vanessa's face as though her very blood had turned to ice. Her perfectly manicured nails dug into the upholstery of her chair. You knew, she accused me, her voice barely above a whisper. You knew all along and you let us believe. I let you show me exactly who you are. I corrected her, gently. And you have, Vanessa. Very thoroughly. Daniel stood abruptly, confusion and shame battling across his features. Mom, I swear I didn't know about this clause. Vanessa said it was all settled, that you had agreed. I know, Daniel, I interrupted, the weight of his betrayal still heavy on my heart despite this small victory. But that doesn't change the fact that you were willing to put your mother in an assisted living facility without even discussing it with me first. Grace reached over and squeezed my hand in silent support. The documents you've been showing around, Rick added, addressing Vanessa directly, constitute attempted fraud if you've represented them as having Margaret's consent. I strongly suggest you retract any filings immediately. Vanessa stood up, her composure shattering completely. This is absurd. We've already made plans. We've paid deposits on renovations. Perhaps, I suggested, taking another calm sip of my tea, you should have consulted me before making such expensive plans for a house you don't control. The grandfather clock chimed 3 times, punctuating the silence that followed my words. Daniel looked lost, caught between his wife's fury and his mother's quiet resolve. What happens now? He finally asked. I set my teacup down and met my son's gaze directly. Now, I think you and Vanessa need to reconsider your living arrangements. This house remains my home, as your father intended. Vanessa grabbed her purse and stormed toward the door. Daniel, we're leaving. Call our lawyer. This isn't over. Daniel hesitated, torn, between following his wife and staying to make amends with his mother. In that moment, looking at his conflicted expression, I saw echoes of the little boy who had once run to me with every hurt, seeking comfort and guidance. But that boy was gone, replaced by a man who had allowed himself to be shaped by greed and ambition. Go, I said softly. You have a lot to think about. After they left, the house felt suddenly larger, the silence more profound. Grace moved to sit beside me, her friendship a balm to my wounded heart. You knew she would try something like this, didn't you? Grace asked. I nodded slowly. I suspected. She's been eyeing this property since the day Daniel brought her home. I just didn't expect my own son to be complicit. Rick gathered his papers, his expression sympathetic. James would be proud of you, Margaret. You stood your ground with dignity. As Rick prepared to leave, I walked him to the door, the weight of the day's events settling around my shoulders like a heavy cloak. What will you do now? He asked. About Daniel? I gazed out at the maple tree in the front yard, its leaves beginning to turn the vibrant red that James had always loved. I'll wait, I answered simply. Some lessons can't be taught. They must be learned through consequence. Daniel needs to see Vanessa for who she truly is, and that may take time. Rick nodded, understanding the patience that comes from genuine love, the kind that allows people to make their mistakes and find their way back. Call me if you need anything, he said, squeezing my hand before departing. As I closed the door behind him, I knew that the battle wasn't over. But for the first time in years, I felt the strength that comes from standing firmly in one's truth. The house remained mine, not just legally, but in every creak of its floorboards and whisper of its walls. That night, I walked through each room, touching the furniture James and I had chosen together, reaffirming my connection to the home we had built. In Daniel's old bedroom, I paused, gazing at the height marks on the doorframe that tracked his growth from a toddler to a young man. We did our best, didn't we, James? I whispered to the empty room. And somewhere in the settling of the house, in the familiar sounds of home, I felt my husband's answer, a resounding yes. The next morning dawned with an unsettling quietness. I moved through my morning routine, brewing coffee, watering the potted orchids on the kitchen windowsill, skimming the newspaper with mechanical precision. The confrontation had left me hollow, like a tree struck by lightning but still standing. My phone remained silent. No apologetic text from Daniel, no threatening call from Vanessa. Just the hush of aftermath. I was spreading jam on my toast when the doorbell rang. Through the beveled glass panels, I could see Grace's familiar silhouette, her silver bob catching the morning light. "I brought reinforcements," she announced as I opened the door, holding up a bottle of mimosa ingredients and a bakery box. "Figured you could use some fortification after yesterday's battle." I smiled despite myself. "It's not even 9 o'clock, Grace." "It's 5 o'clock somewhere," she countered, breezing past me into the kitchen. "Besides, we're celebrating your victory." Victory. The word felt hollow. I'd won the right to stay in my own home, but at what cost? My relationship with my only child lay in tatters. Grace read my expression with the ease of 40 years of friendship. "He'll come around, Maggie, once he's had time to think." "I'm not sure there's any coming back from this," I admitted, pouring us both coffee instead of the offered champagne. "He was willing to ship me off to an assisted living facility, Grace. Me, I still run 3 miles every morning." Grace nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. "That was Vanessa's doing. You know it was." I sank into a kitchen chair. "He let her do it. That's what hurts the most." "Men can be incredibly dense when they're under a manipulative woman's spell," Grace said, opening the bakery box to reveal an assortment of pastries. "Remember how James nearly sold your anniversary diamond to invest in that ridiculous alpaca farm scheme?" The memory surprised a laugh out of me. "That was different. James was sweet but gullible. Daniel, he knows better." "Does he?" Grace asked, eyebrow raised. "That girl has been poisoning his mind against you for years, drop by drop, like arsenic in tea." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text message. "Daniel, can we talk? Just us." My heart lurched. "It's Daniel. He wants to meet." Grace peered over my shoulder at the screen. "Are you going to?" "I don't know." My thumb hovered over the keyboard. "Part of me wants to hear what he has to say, but another part is afraid he'll hurt you again." Grace finished for me. I nodded, unable to voice the fear that had settled in my chest, that my son, the boy I had raised with all the love and wisdom I possessed, had become someone I no longer recognized. "Meet him on neutral ground," Grace advised. "Not here, where there are too many emotions tied up in the walls themselves." After careful consideration, I texted back, "Wilson's Cafe at 1 p.m. Daniel's response came immediately. "I'll be there." Grace stayed for another hour, her presence a balm to my wounded spirit. We reminisced about the early days when we were both young mothers, navigating the challenges of raising children while building careers. Grace had lost her Tom to cancer. Around the same time, I'd lost James to his heart condition, and our shared grief had forged a bond stronger than mere friendship. "Whatever happens with Daniel," Grace said as she was leaving, "you still have family in me." I hugged her tightly, grateful for the constancy of her support. Wilson's Cafe sat equidistant between my house and Daniel's condo in the city, a small, unassuming place where neither of us had any particular history. I arrived early, choosing a corner table that offered privacy without feeling isolated. The familiar sense of coffee and baked goods failed to calm my nerves. Daniel entered at precisely 1 o'clock, punctual as always. He looked tired, the kind of exhaustion that comes from emotional rather than physical exertion. He spotted me immediately and walked over, his gait hesitant. "Mom," he said, the word carrying the weight of all that remained unspoken between us. "Daniel," I replied, gesturing to the chair across from me. He sat down, his hands fidgeting with the menu, though I doubted he was reading it. A waitress approached, and we both ordered coffee more out of social obligation than desire. When she left, Daniel finally met my eyes. "I didn't know about the clause in the deed. I swear I didn't." "I believe you," I said, surprising myself with the truth of it. My son had many flaws, but direct dishonesty had never been one of them. "But you still signed papers to take my home away from me." He flinched. Vanessa said you had already agreed, that you wanted to downsize. And you believed her without asking me directly? The hurt seeped into my voice despite my efforts to remain calm. Daniel, I raised you better than that. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of James that my heart ached. I know. I screwed up. Massively. But Vanessa was so convincing, and she said she was handling all the details to spare you the stress. Spare me the stress of becoming homeless? The bitterness I'd been suppressing bubbled to the surface. How considerate of her. Daniel looked down at his hands. She's not what I thought she was. After we left yesterday, she was furious. Not just about the house, but about how it made her look. She kept saying she'd been humiliated, that her friends would laugh at her for failing to secure the property. The property? I repeated. Not your childhood home, not the place. Where you took your first steps and lost your first tooth. A property. I know, Daniel said quietly. It hit me last night, listening to her rage about market values and missed opportunities. She never once mentioned you or how you might feel. That's when I realized what? That I've been blind. Willfully blind. He looked up, his eyes shining with unshed tears. I let her come. Between us because it was easier than standing up to her. And I'm so sorry, Mom. So incredibly sorry. The waitress returned with our coffees, the interruption giving me a moment to collect my thoughts. Part of me wanted to reach across the table and take my son's hand to assure him that all was forgiven. But another part, the part that had lain awake last night reliving the humiliation of being told to pack my bags, held back. Apologies are meaningful when they lead to changed behavior, I said finally, stirring my coffee though I took no sugar. What happens next? Daniel hesitated. I don't know. Last night I slept in the guest room. This morning I told Vanessa I needed space to think. She didn't take it well. I imagine not, I said, remembering the cold fury in Vanessa's eyes when Rick had revealed the truth about the deed. She's talking about contesting the clause, saying it's outdated and wouldn't hold up in modern court. Daniel's voice dropped lower. She's already called 3 different attorneys. I wasn't surprised. Vanessa had always been tenacious when pursuing what she wanted. Let her try. James was thorough, and so was Rick. I don't want any part of it, Daniel said firmly. Whatever she does, I won't support it. Not anymore. A small spark of hope flickered in my chest, but I tempered it with caution. Words are easy, Daniel. Actions are what matter now. He nodded, understanding the implicit challenge. I know I have to earn back your trust. I'm not asking for forgiveness yet. I know I don't deserve it. But I am asking for a chance to show you that I can be the son you raised me to be. I considered his words, weighing them against the hurt that still pulsed like a fresh wound. What about Vanessa? She's your wife. Daniel's expression darkened. I don't know. Yesterday opened my eyes to things I've been ignoring for years. The way she talks about you, the way she's isolated me from friends who don't serve her purposes. I need to do some serious thinking about our relationship. For the first time since he'd entered the cafe, I truly looked at my son. Not through the lens of recent betrayal, but with the clear-eyed love of a mother. He was struggling, caught between loyalty to his wife and the moral compass I'd tried to instill in him. Take the time you need, I said, softening slightly. But know this. I won't be a pawn in whatever game Vanessa is playing. If she pursues legal action against me, I will defend myself with everything I have. I understand, he said, and I wouldn't expect anything less. We finished our coffee in a silence that, while not comfortable, at least wasn't hostile. As we prepared to leave, Daniel hesitated again. There's something else you should know, he said. Vanessa's been contacting real estate developers about the property. She had architectural plans drawn up for townhouses where our house stands. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Not just my home, but the entire property. The gardens James had lovingly cultivated. The ancient maple tree where Daniel's childhood swing still hung. All of it would have been demolished. Thank you for telling me, I managed, my voice steadier than I felt. Mom, Daniel said as we reached the door, whatever happens with Vanessa and me, I want you to know that I love you. I lost sight of what matters, but I'm finding my way back. I nodded, not quite ready to return the sentiment, but acknowledging his effort. One day at a time, Daniel. That's all any of us can do. As I watched him walk to his car, I felt the first tentative unwinding of the knot that had formed in my chest. The road ahead would not be easy, for any of us, but at least now there was a road. I should have known Vanessa wouldn't surrender quietly. The first salvo came 3 days after my cafe meeting with Daniel. A formal letter from Pritchard and Wilcox, one of the most expensive law firms in New York. The envelope felt heavy in my hands, laden with threat. Inside was a carefully worded demand that I reconsider my position regarding the property at 47 Maple Street, suggesting that prolonged legal battles would be costly and emotionally taxing for all parties. The implicit threat was clear. Vanessa was prepared to drain me financially if I didn't acquiesce. I placed the letter on my desk and called Rick immediately. "They're fishing," he assured me after I read him the contents. "The clause is airtight. James made sure of it. But can they drag this out? Bury me in legal fees?" I asked, the worry evident in my voice. Rick's chuckle surprised me. "Did you forget that I handle your legal matters pro bono? James saved my life in Vietnam. I promised him I'd look after you, and I intend to keep that promise." Relief washed over me. "Thank you, Rick. I don't know what I'd do without you." "You'd be just fine," he said confidently. "You're made of stronger stuff than most people realize, Margaret. Now forward that letter to me and try not to worry. This is just the opening gambit." I followed his advice, but worry crept in nonetheless. Vanessa's aggression signaled that Daniel had likely chosen a side, mine, and she was retaliating. I wondered how he was faring under the brunt of her anger. My answer came the next morning when Daniel showed up on my doorstep, a duffel bag in hand and shadows under his eyes. "Daniel," I said, unable to hide my surprise. "What happened?" "Vanessa happened," he said wearily. "She gave me an ultimatum. Either support her lawsuit against you or get out." So I got out. I ushered him inside, noting how his shoulders slumped with exhaustion. "You left her?" "Temporarily," he clarified, setting his bag down in the foyer. "I need space to think, and the condo was becoming a war zone. She's furious that I met with you without her knowledge." A complicated mix of emotions washed over me. Concern for my son's pain, vindication that he'd chosen what was right, guilt that I was the cause of his marital strife. "You can stay as long as you need," I said, leading him to the kitchen where the coffee pot was still half full. "Your room is exactly as you left it." Daniel managed a tired smile. "Dinosaur sheets and all?" "I may have updated those," I admitted, pouring him a cup of coffee. "The guest room is made up too, if you'd prefer." He shook his head. "My old room sounds perfect, actually." After a pause, he added, "I got the letter from Pritchard and Wilcox. I'm guessing you did too." "This morning," I confirmed. "Rick says not to worry. He's right. Their case is weak, and they know it. That's why they're trying to intimidate you into settling before it goes any further." Daniel sighed, rubbing his temples. "I'm so sorry you're going through this because of me." "Because of Vanessa," I corrected gently, "and partly because of James's foresight. He suspected something like this might happen someday." Daniel looked surprised. "Dad knew?" I thought back to those final months of James's life, when he'd insisted on updating our will and the house deed. Not specifically about Vanessa, of course, but he worried about predatory people taking advantage after he was gone. He'd seen it happen to his own mother. Understanding dawned on Daniel's face. Grandma Elise and Uncle Robert. I never made the connection. James's brother had moved their widowed mother out of her home under the guise of taking care of her, sold the property for a tidy profit, and installed her in a bare-bones nursing home. By the time James discovered what had happened, the damage was done. Elise died 6 months later, heartbroken and displaced. "History has a way of attempting to repeat itself," I said. But this time, we were prepared. Daniel's phone buzzed incessantly throughout the morning. Vanessa, no doubt, alternating between demands and apologies. He silenced it eventually, the decision etched in the firm set of his jaw. By afternoon, Grace had heard the news and arrived bearing a casserole and determination. "So you've left the Barracuda," she said to Daniel without preamble. "About time." "Grace," I admonished, though without much conviction. "It's temporary," Daniel reiterated, though he sounded less certain than he had that morning. "I just needed to step back and gain some perspective." Grace fixed him with a penetrating look. "And what perspective have you gained so far?" Daniel hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "That I've been making excuses for Vanessa's behavior for years, that I let her isolate me from people who truly care about me, and that I almost participated in something unforgivable. Self-awareness is a good first step," Grace conceded, her expression softening slightly. "The next is making amends." Daniel nodded, solemnly. "I'm trying." We spent the evening together, the three of us, sharing a meal that felt like the first step toward healing. Daniel spoke about his work at the investment firm, his voice gaining animation when he described a sustainable energy project he was helping to fund. I watched him, seeing glimpses of the passionate, principled young man I'd raised peeking through the polished exterior Vanessa had cultivated. The peaceful interlude was shattered the next morning by the sound of tires on gravel and an engine being cut abruptly. From my bedroom window, I could see Vanessa's sleek BMW parked haphazardly in my driveway. Daniel appeared in my doorway, already dressed for the day. "I'll handle this," he said grimly. "We'll handle it together," I countered, reaching for my robe. "This is my home, remember?" By the time we reached the front door, Vanessa was already hammering on it, her voice carrying through the wood. "Daniel, I know you're in there. Open this door right now." Daniel opened it calmly, blocking the entrance with his body. "Vanessa, this isn't the place for a scene." She looked past him to where I stood in the hallway, her eyes narrowing. "So this is how it's going to be? You're choosing her over me? After everything I've done for you?" "I'm choosing what's right," Daniel said firmly. "What you're doing is wrong, Vanessa. It's cruel, and it's unnecessary." "Unnecessary?" she hissed. "Do you have any idea what that property is worth? What we could do with that kind of money?" "It's not about money," Daniel replied. "It's about respect. It's about family." Vanessa laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "Family? She's holding you back just like she always has. Why do you think we never got those international postings you wanted? Because poor mommy would be too far away." Daniel's expression hardened. "That's not true. I turned down those positions because they didn't align with my values, not because of my mother." "Your values?" Vanessa scoffed. "You mean the small-town mentality she drilled into you? The one that's kept you from reaching your full potential?" I stepped forward then, unwilling to let her distort the truth any longer. "That small-town mentality includes concepts like integrity and loyalty, Vanessa. Perhaps if you'd been raised with similar values, you wouldn't be standing on my porch threatening legal action over a house you have no right to." Vanessa's perfectly composed mask slipped, revealing the raw fury beneath. "This isn't over, Margaret. Not by a long shot. And Daniel," she turned to him, voice dropping to a dangerous purr, "when you're ready to remember which side your bread is buttered on, you know where to find me." With that, she spun on her heel and stalked back to her car, leaving a charged silence in her wake. Daniel closed the door slowly, leaning against it as if physically drained by the confrontation. "I'm sorry you had to witness that." "I'm not," I said honestly. It was illuminating. He looked at me questioningly. "Sometimes we need to see people at their worst to understand who they truly are," I explained, "and who they're not." Daniel nodded slowly, the weight, of realization settling over him. "I've made some terrible choices, haven't I?" I placed a hand on his arm, feeling the tension in his muscles. "We all make mistakes, Daniel. The question is what we do next." As if on cue, my phone rang, Rick calling with an update. The legal battle was just beginning, but standing there with my son beside me, I felt oddly prepared for whatever came next. The house had weathered many storms over the decades. It would weather this one too. And perhaps, in the process, we would rebuild not just our relationship, but Daniel's understanding of what truly constituted value in this life. The legal siege intensified over the next few weeks. Vanessa's attorneys filed motions challenging the validity of James's deed modification, claiming it was antiquated and discriminatory. They demanded depositions, financial records, and even a psychological evaluation to determine if I was competent to manage the property. Each new legal document arrived like a poisoned arrow, designed to wear down my resistance through 1,000 small wounds. But Rick remained unflappable, his calm confidence a steady anchor. "It's all smoke and mirrors," he assured me as I sat in his office reviewing the latest filings. "They're hoping to exhaust you into settling." "They don't know me very well then," I replied, straightening my spine against the leather chair. "I raised a teenage boy on my own while working 60-hour weeks. I know something about endurance." Rick's eyes crinkled with approval. "That's the Margaret Lawson I know. Now we have our court date set. For 3 weeks from now. Judge Reynolds is presiding. She's fair and doesn't tolerate bullying tactics." As the legal battle raged, Daniel remained at the house, sleeping in his childhood bedroom and gradually reacquainting himself with the person he'd been before Vanessa. We fell into a comfortable routine, morning coffee on the porch, discussing the news or reminiscing about James. In the evenings, Daniel cooked, a hobby Vanessa had discouraged as unnecessary domesticity, and I rediscovered my son's talent for creating mouth-watering pasta dishes. "Dad taught me this one," he explained one night, stirring a fragrant sauce that filled the kitchen with the scent of basil and garlic. Remember how he used to say cooking was like chemistry for hungry people? I laughed, the memory sweet, rather than painful. He burned so many pots learning that chemistry. Worth it, though, Daniel said, tasting the sauce with a satisfied nod. He said the best things in life take patience and practice. He was right about that, I agreed, watching my son move confidently around the kitchen that had once been the heart of our family life, and about many other things. Daniel paused, wooden, spoon suspended midair, like protecting you from people like Vanessa, like making sure we both had time to recognize the truth, I corrected gently. James didn't hate Vanessa. He never even met her. He simply understood human nature and wanted to ensure that hasty decisions couldn't harm our future. Daniel nodded slowly, returning to his cooking. I keep thinking about what might have happened. Without that clause, you would be in that assisted living facility by now. And this house. He gestured to the warm kitchen, the dining room beyond with its memories of family dinners and holiday gatherings. But it didn't happen, I reminded him. And that's what matters now. 2 days later, Grace arrived with disturbing news. Vanessa's been talking to the neighbors, she announced, settling at the kitchen table with a worried frown. Telling them you're declining mentally and Daniel had to move back home to manage you. Daniel's face darkened. That's low, even for her. It gets worse, Grace continued. She's saying the reason you won't sell is because you're becoming a hoarder, that the house is unsafe. I felt a chill despite the warm spring day. She's trying to build a case for incompetence. Rick had warned me this might happen, a flanking maneuver when the direct legal approach seemed unlikely to succeed. We should document the condition of the house, Daniel suggested, immediately practical. Photos, maybe a walkthrough video. And I'll have Dr. Patel write a letter confirming your excellent health, physical and mental, Grace added. I'll call him today. Their immediate rallying touched me deeply. After James died, I'd feared being truly alone when Daniel eventually grew up and moved away. Now, surrounded by their concern and quick thinking, I realized I had built a different kind of family, one forged through love and loyalty rather than just blood. Thank you both, I said simply. That afternoon, as Daniel methodically photographed each room of the house, I found myself in James's study again. The room remained largely as he'd left it, bookshelves filled with his engineering texts and dog-eared mystery novels, the leather chair worn smooth where he'd spent countless evenings reading. I ran my fingers along his desk, remembering how he'd sit here paying bills, his brow furrowed in concentration, how he'd looked up when I entered, his face always brightening as if my arrival was the best part of his day. I wish you were here, I whispered to the empty chair. You'd know exactly what to do. As if in answer, my gaze fell on the bottom desk drawer, the one where I'd found the deed with its protective clause. On impulse, I pulled it open again. Behind the legal files was a small leather-bound book I hadn't noticed before. James's journal. I hesitated, respecting his privacy even after all these years. But something told me there might be answers here. Guidance from the man who had loved me enough to protect me from beyond the grave. The journal opened naturally to a page dated 3 months before his death. The handwriting was shakier than I remembered, a testament to his weakening condition. Spoke with Rick today about the house. Margaret doesn't understand why I'm so insistent about this clause, but I've seen how the world treats women alone. My own mother, stripped of her home and dignity by those who should have protected her. I won't let that happen to Maggie. She thinks I'm being paranoid, and maybe I am, but I've watched Daniel lately, so eager to please, so vulnerable to strong personalities. I love my son, but I know his weaknesses, and I fear for who might exploit them someday when I'm not here to guide him. If I'm wrong, no harm done. The clause sits quietly, unneeded, but if I'm right, it might save everything that matters to Margaret. Tears blurred my vision. James had seen it all, had anticipated this exact scenario with uncanny accuracy. Not because he didn't trust Daniel, but because he understood him so well. Both his generous heart and his desire to please those he loved. I closed the journal, holding it against my chest for a moment before returning it to the drawer. In a strange way, it felt as though James was still fighting for me, still standing between me and those who would take advantage. "Mom?" Daniel called from the doorway. "You okay?" I turned, wiping away a stray tear. "Yes, just remembering your father." Daniel entered the study, looking around with nostalgia. "I always loved this room. It smelled like Dad, books, and that terrible aftershave he insisted on using." I laughed softly. "Old Spice. I kept trying to upgrade him, but he was loyal to a fault. Like you, Daniel said, his expression growing serious. You never gave up on me, even when I was being an idiot. Language, I chided automatically, then smiled at the absurdity of correcting my adult son. Daniel sat on the edge of the desk. I've been thinking a lot about what happens after the court hearing. Regardless of the outcome, I can't go back to Vanessa, not after seeing who she really is. Are you sure? I asked carefully. Marriage is a serious commitment. So is being a son, he replied. A good son wouldn't have let his mother be treated the way Vanessa treated you. I failed that commitment for years. I moved to stand in front of him, taking his hands in mine. You're here now. That's what matters. Is it enough, though? He asked, vulnerability clear in his voice. Can you forgive me for being so blind? The question hung between us, weighted with all the hurt of recent weeks and the deeper pain of the years when Vanessa had slowly driven a wedge between us. Could I forgive him? The answer came with surprising clarity. I already have, I said softly. The moment you chose what was right over what was easy. Daniel's eyes filled with tears, and suddenly he was hugging me fiercely, like he used to as a child after a bad dream. I held him just as tightly, feeling something broken begin to heal between us. The moment was interrupted by the doorbell. We separated, both a little embarrassed by the emotional display. Probably Grace, I said, wiping my eyes. She mentioned dropping by with that letter from Dr. Patel. But when Daniel opened the front door, it wasn't Grace who stood on the porch. It was a young woman I'd never seen before, professionally dressed with a leather portfolio tucked under her arm. Mrs. Lawson? She inquired. I'm Emma Chen from the Westchester County Department of Adult Protective Services. We've received a concerning report about your living situation. May I come in? Daniel stiffened beside me. What kind of report? The social worker glanced between us. Are you a family member? I'm Daniel Lawson, Margaret's son. What is this about? Ms. Chen consulted her notes. We received an anonymous report alleging elder neglect and possible financial exploitation. I'm here to conduct an initial assessment. I felt a cold fury settle in my chest. Vanessa, I said quietly to Daniel. He nodded, jaw tight with anger. Let me handle this. For the next hour, Daniel guided Ms. Chen through our immaculate home, explaining the legal situation with remarkable composure. He showed her the photographs he'd just taken, the well-stocked refrigerator, my organized medication schedule. He introduced her to Grace, who arrived midway through the inspection, and who vouched vehemently for my mental acuity and independence. By the time Ms. Chen left, she seemed almost apologetic. I'll note in my report that the allegations appear unfounded, she assured us. But I should warn you that whoever filed this report seemed very determined. They provided extensive documentation of supposed cognitive decline. We understand, I said, walking her to the door, and we appreciate your thoroughness. After she left, the three of us gathered in the kitchen, the mood somber. She's getting desperate, Gracia observed, pouring herself a cup of coffee. This means your legal case is strong. Daniel paced the kitchen, barely containing his anger. It's beyond desperate. It's cruel. She's trying to paint you as incompetent to gain control of the house, using the system meant to protect vulnerable seniors as a weapon. I sat quietly, processing the violation I felt at having my home and competence inspected, based on malicious lies. She won't stop, will she? Daniel shook his head grimly. Not until she has no choice. Vanessa doesn't lose gracefully. Then we make sure she has no choice, I said with newfound determination. Rick mentioned something about a countersuit for harassment and legal fees. I think it's time we discuss that option. Grace raised her coffee cup in a toast. Now you're talking. Fight fire with fire. Daniel stopped pacing, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. Actually, there might be another way. Something that could end this without more legal battles. What do you mean? I asked. I need to make a phone call first, he said, to verify something. But if I'm right, he trailed off, heading for James's study with purpose in his stride. Grace raised an eyebrow at me. What's he thinking? I'm not sure, I admitted. But he has that look James used to get when he'd solved a particularly difficult problem. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt a flicker of hope that we might find a resolution that didn't involve more conflict. Daniel had inherited not just James's features, but his analytical mind as well. If he saw a path forward, it was likely one worth exploring. As Grace and I sat waiting, I glanced out the window at the maple tree in full spring glory. Its roots ran deep beneath the property, anchoring it through decades of storms. Like those roots, the foundations of love and integrity that James and I had built our life upon remained strong, supporting us through this latest tempest. Whatever Daniel was planning, whatever came next, we would face it together, as a family. Daniel emerged from the study an hour later, his expression a mix of triumph and grim satisfaction. "I need to go to the condo to get something," he announced. "I'll be back before dinner." "Daniel, what are you planning?" I asked, concerned by the determined set of his jaw. He hesitated, then sighed. "I'd rather not say until I'm sure. But if I'm right, this could end Vanessa's lawsuit without a court battle." Grace, who had stayed to provide moral support, fixed him with a pointed look. "You're not planning anything foolish, are you? Your mother has enough to worry about without adding your impetuousness to the mix." Daniel smiled faintly. "Nothing foolish. Just something I should have done a long time ago. Look at the financial records Vanessa always insisted on handling." After he left, Grace and I busied ourselves with dinner preparations, though my mind remained preoccupied with what Daniel might have discovered. Grace, ever practical, kept the conversation focused on immediate concerns. "Dr. Patel's letter is excellent," she said, chopping vegetables with precision. "He's documented your physical and cognitive health in great detail, including the results of your last checkup. There's no way anyone could claim you're incapable of managing your affairs. Unless they claim he's biased because he's known me for 20 years, I pointed out. Grace shrugged. "Then we get a second opinion. The point is, Vanessa's tactics are growing more desperate because she's losing ground." The afternoon slipped into evening, and Daniel still hadn't returned. I was beginning to worry when my phone chimed with a text. "Running late. Don't wait up. Everything's fine." Grace left reluctantly around 9, extracting a promise that I'd call immediately if anything happened. I tried to distract myself with a book, but the words swam before my eyes, my thoughts too scattered to focus. It was nearly midnight when I heard Daniel's key in the lock. I hurried to the foyer, relief flooding through me at the sight of him safe, but my relief quickly turned to concern. He looked exhausted, his face drawn, but there was a resolute energy about him that reminded me of James in his most determined moments. "I'm sorry I'm so late," he said, setting down a cardboard box filled with folders and a laptop. Once I started going, through everything I couldn't stop. "What did you find?" I asked, eyeing the box. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. "Evidence. A lot of it. Can we sit down? This might take a while to explain." We settled in the living room, where Daniel began methodically removing files from the box and arranging them on the coffee table. "When Vanessa and I got married, she insisted on managing our finances," he began. "She has an MBA in finance, and I was happy to let her handle it. She set up a system where my paychecks were deposited into a joint account, and then she transferred money to various investments and savings accounts." I nodded, unsurprised. Vanessa had always emphasized her financial acumen. "What I didn't realize," Daniel continued, "was that she'd been systematically diverting funds into accounts only she could access, small amounts at first but increasing over time." He opened a folder containing bank statements, pointing to highlighted transactions. "See these transfers to VLC Investments? That's a shell company she created. It stands for Vanessa Louise Carter, her maiden name." I studied the statements, noting the regular transfers ranging from a few hundred to several $1,000s. "She was stealing from you?" "Not technically stealing," Daniel clarified. "The money came from our joint account, which she had every right to access. But she wasn't investing it for our future as she claimed. She was building her own safety net, one I couldn't touch if things went south." He opened another folder containing property records. "She used that money to buy a condo in Miami 2 years ago. It's in her name only. She told me she was investing in mutual funds for our retirement." The revelation left me speechless. I had never trusted Vanessa, but the scale and deliberation of her deception stunned me. "There's more," Daniel said grimly. "Remember those architectural plans she had drawn up for our property? They weren't for townhouses. They were for a luxury assisted living facility. She'd already approached investors, promising them a prime piece of Westchester real estate with an estimated return of 300% over 5 years. But she didn't own the property," I protested. "She told them it was a done deal," Daniel explained, "that you had agreed to sell and were just working out the details. She collected nearly $500,000 in seed money." I gasped. "That's fraud." "Exactly." Daniel's expression was grim. "She's been running a sophisticated investment scheme, using our relationship and my family connections to give herself credibility. And this house was going to be her crowning achievement." a multi-million-dollar development project that would establish her as a serious player in real estate. The pieces suddenly fit together. Vanessa's desperation, her escalating tactics, her refusal to accept defeat. She needs this house or her entire scheme collapses. I realized aloud. Daniel nodded. And her investors start asking questions she can't answer. What are you going to do? I asked, watching my son's face carefully. He met my gaze directly. I've already done it. I spent the evening with Rick, showing him everything I found. He called in a colleague who specializes in financial fraud. Together, we compiled a package of evidence and submitted it to the district attorney's office. I sat back, stunned by his decisiveness. Vanessa could go to jail. Yes, Daniel agreed, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. And she probably will. What she's done is serious, Mom. It's not just about us. Anymore. There are investors who trusted her with their money based on fraudulent promises. A complex mixture of emotions washed over me. Vindication, certainly, but also sadness for my son, whose marriage was now irrevocably shattered in the most painful way possible. I'm so sorry, Daniel, I said softly. This must be devastating for you. He was quiet for a moment, staring at the evidence of his wife's betrayal spread across the coffee table. The strange thing is, I feel more relieved than anything. Like I've been carrying a weight I didn't even know was there, and now it's gone. Relief is often the first emotion when we finally confront a truth we've been avoiding, I observed. Daniel gathered the papers back into their folders. Rick says Vanessa's attorneys will drop the lawsuit against you as soon as they learn about the fraud investigation. They won't want to be associated with it. And what about you and Vanessa? I asked gently. I've already contacted a divorce attorney, he said, his voice firm despite the pain evident in his eyes. Our marriage was built on lies, Mom. I can't go back from that. I reached across the table and took his hand. You're doing the right thing, even though it's the hard thing. I'm proud of you. He squeezed my hand, a ghost of a smile crossing his face. I learned that from you, and from Dad. We sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, the weight of the evening's revelations settling around us. Finally, Daniel stood, stretching his tired muscles. We should get some sleep, he suggested. Tomorrow's going to be intense. His prediction proved accurate. By noon the next day, Vanessa's lawyer had withdrawn the lawsuit challenging the deed. By 3 o'clock, Rick called to inform us that the DA's office had opened a formal investigation into Vanessa's financial activities. And by dinner time, Daniel received a flurry of increasingly desperate texts from Vanessa herself, ranging from threats to pleading to declarations of undying love. He showed me the final message, his expression a mix of sadness and resolve. You're making a terrible mistake, Daniel. I did everything for us, for our future. Please don't do this to me. To us. We can work this out. Are you going to respond? I asked. He shook his head. There's nothing left to say. The DA's office has advised me not to communicate with her directly now that she's under investigation. The following days passed in a strange limbo. Daniel moved more of his belongings from the condo to the house, officially taking up residence in his childhood home again. We established new routines, finding comfort in shared meals and quiet evenings reading in the living room. Grace visited regularly, bringing news from her extensive network of friends. Vanessa's trying to leave the country, she reported one afternoon. Janice's daughter works at the DA's office. They've confiscated her passport. I'm not sure I want to hear all the details, Daniel admitted. It feels voyeuristic somehow. I understood his reluctance. Despite everything, there was dignity in not gloating over Vanessa's downfall. The justice being served was necessary, but taking pleasure in it would only diminish us. A week after Daniel submitted the evidence, we received a visit from Detective Lisa Morales of the Financial Crimes Unit. She interviewed Daniel for hours about his knowledge of Vanessa's activities, treating him with a compassion that suggested she understood he was as much a victim as the investors. Will he face any charges? I asked her privately as she prepared to leave. Detective Morales shook her head. Based on everything we've seen, Mr. Lawson was deliberately kept in the dark. His cooperation has been invaluable in building our case. And Vanessa? Ms. Carter is looking at multiple counts of fraud, misrepresentation, and possibly money laundering, she replied professionally. I can't discuss specifics, but I can tell you this investigation has expanded significantly since we received your son's information. After she left, Daniel and I sat on the porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The spring air carried the scent of blooming lilacs from the garden James had planted decades ago. I keep thinking about those investors, Daniel said after a while. people who trusted. Vanessa, with their savings, their futures, all because of my name, my family's reputation. You're not responsible for her actions, I reminded him. No, but I feel responsible for making things right, he replied. I've been talking with my firm about establishing a restitution fund. It won't cover everything, but it might help some of those people recover what they lost. I studied my son's profile in the fading light, seeing the man he had become despite, or perhaps because of, this painful journey. James would be so proud of you right now. Daniel smiled faintly. I hope so. I'm trying to be the man he raised me to be. You are, I assured him. Making mistakes doesn't define us. How we respond to them does. As darkness settled over the neighborhood, I thought about the house, around us, still standing, still sheltering us through life's storms. James had protected it through his foresight, and now it was protecting us in return, providing a sanctuary where healing could begin. The legal battles were ending, but the emotional aftermath would take longer to resolve. Yet sitting there with Daniel, I felt a deep certainty that whatever came next, we would face it. Together, mother and son, just as James would have wanted. And that, more than any legal victory, felt like justice. Autumn arrived in Westchester with a painter's palette of russet and gold, transforming our maple tree into a blazing sentinel. 6 months had passed since Vanessa's schemes collapsed around her, 6 months of gradual healing and rediscovery. The criminal case against her had moved, swiftly accelerated by the mountain of evidence and her eventual guilty plea. The headlines had been mercifully brief. Financial advisor pleads guilty to investment fraud. 3 years in a minimum security prison, followed by 5 years of probation. The sentencing had come with a substantial order for restitution that would take her decades to fulfill. Daniel had attended the sentencing, hearing alone, returning with shadows under his eyes but a lightness to his shoulders. It's really over, he'd said, accepting the cup of tea I offered. She didn't even look at me. The divorce had been finalized 2 months earlier, a clinical dissolution of a marriage built on shifting sand. Daniel had been generous in the settlement, despite the fraud, allowing Vanessa to keep the Miami condo. That would be waiting for her upon release. Not out of lingering affection, but from a desire to close this chapter with dignity rather than vengeance. On this crisp October morning, I stood in the kitchen preparing a breakfast frittata while Daniel jogged through the neighborhood, a habit he'd developed during his healing process. The house smelled of coffee and herbs, sunlight streaming through, windows we'd replaced together over the summer, a project that had given Daniel's hands purpose while his heart mended. The doorbell rang just as I was sliding the frittata into the oven. Wiping my hands on a dish towel, I made my way to the front door, surprised to find Rick Palmer on my doorstep, a manila envelope in his hand and an uncharacteristically nervous expression on his face. Rick, I greeted him warmly. This is a pleasant surprise. Come in. I've just put breakfast in the oven. He stepped inside, glancing around with approval at the freshly painted entryway. The house looks wonderful, Margaret. Those new curtains brighten everything. Daniel's idea, I replied, leading him to the kitchen. Coffee, please. He settled at the kitchen table, placing the envelope carefully in front of him. I have something for you. Something James left with me a long time ago, with specific instructions about when to give it to you. I paused in the act of pouring coffee, a familiar ache blooming in my chest at the mention of James. Even after all these years, his name still carried both warmth and loss. What is it? I asked, setting a steaming mug before Rick. He pushed the envelope toward me. A letter. James asked me to give it to you when the house has served its purpose. I wasn't entirely sure what he meant until recently, watching how everything unfolded with Daniel. With slightly trembling fingers, I opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in James's distinctive handwriting, bold strokes and precise angles, just like the man himself. The date at the top showed it had been written just weeks before his death. My dearest Maggie, if you're reading this, then Rick has determined that the protective clause I insisted on has fulfilled its purpose. I hope it was never needed, that this letter seems like the paranoid rambling of a dying man. But if it was necessary, if someone tried to take your home from you, then know that protecting you, even from beyond, has been my final act of love. This house has been more than walls and a roof to us. It's been the container for our life together, for the family we built. Every scratch on the banister tells a story. Every creak in the floor is the echo of footsteps. Yours, mine, Daniel's. I couldn't bear the thought of you being forced from these memories, from the place where I can still be with you in some small way. But Maggie, my practical, clear-eyed love, I also know that there may come a day when this house has served its purpose, when holding on to it no longer serves your happiness or growth. The protection I put in place was never meant to be a chain binding you to the past, only a shield until you could choose your own path forward. So now I release you from any obligation you might feel to preserve what we built. The house has protected you. Perhaps now it's time for you to decide what comes next, without my ghostly hand guiding your decisions. Whether you stay or go, know that you carry my heart with you always, in a place no deed or document can touch. All my love, through all of time. James' tears blurred my vision as I read the last lines. How like James, too. Anticipate not just the threat, but the aftermath, to ensure I wouldn't feel bound by his protection once it had served its purpose. The back door opened and Daniel entered, flushed from his run. He stopped short at the sight of Rick and my tear-streaked face. "What's wrong?" he asked, instantly concerned. I passed him the letter wordlessly. As he read, his expression softened, and by the final lines, he too was blinking rapidly. "Dad always did think of everything," he said quietly, returning the letter to me with gentle hands. Rick cleared his throat, emotion making his voice rougher than usual. "James asked me to tell you that the house is truly yours now, Margaret. The protective clause has done its job. If you want to sell, downsize, travel the world, whatever you choose, the path is clear." The three of us sat in silence for a moment, the presence of James almost palpable in the kitchen he had once filled with his booming laugh and terrible cooking attempts. "What are you thinking, Mom?" Daniel finally asked. I looked around the kitchen, at the worn spot on the counter where I'd kneaded countless loaves of bread, the height marks on the doorframe tracking Daniel's growth, the window through which I'd watched seasons change for 3 decades. "I'm thinking," I said slowly, "that your father was right. This house has served its purpose. It protected us when we needed protection. It gave us shelter while we healed. But perhaps now—" "You want to sell?" Daniel asked, no judgment in his voice. "Not sell," I clarified, the idea crystallizing as I spoke. "Transform. This house is too big for just me, but it's full of love and memories. I've been thinking lately about all those books on fostering I used to read, back when we were considering expanding our family." Rick's eyebrows rose. "You're thinking of becoming a foster parent? At your age?" I laughed at his expression. "Not exactly. But this house has 5 bedrooms, Rick. There are so many children in the sewer system who need stable, loving homes. What if we converted this place into a group home for older foster kids, the ones who often get overlooked?" Daniel's face lit up with understanding. "A safe place for teenagers who need stability during their last years in the system." "Mom, that's brilliant." "It would require renovations," I acknowledged, "and certifications, staff. The James Lawson Home for teens," Daniel said, testing the name. "Dad would have loved that." Rick was already pulling out his phone. "I have a contact at Family Services who could guide us through the process, and I'd be happy to handle the legal side pro bono." As they began excitedly discussing logistics, I felt a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the oven's heat. James had gifted me with protection when I needed it most. Now I could transform that gift into protection for others, young people without the safety net that Daniel had grown up with. The frittata timer chimed, pulling me back to the present. As I served breakfast, our conversation flowed from practical considerations to broader dreams. By the time Rick left, we had the outline of a plan that would honor James's legacy, while creating something new and necessary. That evening, Daniel and I sat on the porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues that matched the turning leaves. "Are you sure about this, Mom?" he asked. "It's a big undertaking." "I'm more sure about this than I've been about anything in years," I replied honestly. "After everything that happened with Vanessa, I've been thinking a lot about purpose, about what comes next. I don't want to just exist in this house. I want it to continue being a place of love and growth." Daniel nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I want to help, not just with the renovations and setup, but going forward. I've been considering a career change anyway." "Away from investment banking?" I asked, surprised. Daniel had built a successful career in finance, following in James's footsteps. "The firm's values have been shifting," he explained. "More emphasis on profit, less on ethical investing. After everything with Vanessa, I can't ignore those red flags anymore. I've been talking with some nonprofits about financial management positions." Pride swelled in my chest. "Your father would approve. He always said making money was easy. Making a Difference was the real challenge. As darkness settled around us, I thought about James's letter, about being released from obligation. What he had understood, what he had always understood better than anyone, was that true protection wasn't about walls and legal clauses. It was about creating the conditions for growth and new beginnings. The house had served its purpose as our family home. Now it would begin a new chapter, sheltering young people who needed exactly what Daniel and I could offer: stability, safety, and the chance to build a future on solid ground. In protecting me, James had ultimately given me the greatest gift of all, the freedom to choose what came next. And I was choosing to extend that same protection to others who needed it just as desperately. The maple leaves rustled in the evening breeze, a gentle reminder that change, like the seasons, was not something to fear, but to embrace. Whatever challenges lay ahead in this new venture, I felt ready to face them, fortified by the past, but no longer bound by it. The house of cards Vanessa had tried to build had collapsed, but our home, built on love and now renewed by purpose, stood stronger than ever. 2 years later, I stood in the doorway of what had once been Daniel's bedroom, watching 17-year-old Zoe arrange framed photographs on her dresser. Her dark hair fell in a curtain across her face as she positioned each frame with deliberate care. Pictures of her younger siblings, currently in a foster home across town, whom she visited every weekend. "Almost done settling in?" I asked, rapping lightly on the open door. Zoe looked up, a smile transforming her serious face. "Yes, Ms. Maggie, this room is twice the size of my last one. It was my son's room when he was your age," I told her, stepping inside at her inviting gesture. "He covered these walls with basketball posters and kept his homework hidden under the bed." She laughed, the sound still new enough to make my heart lift. When Zoe had first arrived at the James Lawson home 6 months ago, she'd been silent and watchful, hardened by years in the system and a determination to age out without forming attachments. Now she was preparing to become our first resident assistant, helping to mentor the newer arrivals while attending community college classes. "Where is Mr. Daniel today?" she asked, placing the last photo, a snapshot, of herself with her siblings and me at their recent birthday celebration. "Meeting with potential donors," I replied. "The expansion plans for the East Wing are getting expensive." In the 2 years since we'd converted the house into a group home, we'd grown from 3 residents to 8, with a waiting list that broke my heart each time I reviewed it. The need for safe, supportive homes for teens in the system far outstripped what our single Victorian could provide, leading to our current campaign to add more bedrooms and a proper study area. Daniel had surprised everyone, including himself, by throwing himself completely into the project. After leaving his investment firm, he'd taken courses in social work and nonprofit management, eventually becoming the home's executive director while I served as resident house mother. His financial expertise proved invaluable in securing grants and donations, while his personal experience with betrayal and recovery helped him connect with teens facing their own life challenges. The doorbell chimed downstairs, its familiar ring echoing through the house that now buzzed with young voices and energy. "That's probably Grace with the supplies for tomorrow's celebration," I said, checking my watch. "Would you mind helping her unload while I finish the lasagna?" Zoe nodded eagerly. "Of course." As she bounded down the stairs with the resilient energy of youth, I made my way to the kitchen, now expanded and modernized to accommodate cooking for a dozen people regularly. The renovation had preserved the heart of the old space while adapting it to our new purpose, much like the rest of the house. Grace had indeed arrived, directing 2 teenage boys from the home as they carried in decorations and supplies for tomorrow's special event, our 2-year anniversary celebration, combined with a dedication ceremony for the planned expansion. "Everything's on schedule," Grace reported, settling at the kitchen island while the boys ferried bags to the dining room. "The tent will be delivered at 9, chairs at 10, and the caterers will set up by 11. Though I still think you should have let them handle all the food." I smiled, sliding the lasagna into the industrial-sized oven we'd installed. Some things need the personal touch. James's mother's lasagna recipe has been part of every important family occasion since Daniel was born. It wouldn't be right to outsource tradition. Grace nodded, understanding as always. At 72, she had officially retired from her dental practice, but now volunteered as our house grandmother, offering the teens a different generation's perspective and enough homemade cookies to feed a small army. "Have you decided what you're going to say tomorrow?" she asked. "For the dedication?" "I've been working on it," I admitted, though finding the right words to express everything these past 2 years have meant. The front door opened again, and Daniel's voice carried down the hallway, followed by another male voice that sounded vaguely familiar. Curious, I wiped my hands and stepped into the dining room just as Daniel entered with Rick Palmer. Look who I ran into at the foundation. Office, Daniel announced, his arm around Rick's shoulders. He has news. Rick, now 80 and moving more slowly but with the same sharp intelligence in his eyes, smiled broadly. The Westchester Community Foundation voted this morning. They're fully funding the East Wing expansion. Joy bubbled through me. Rick, that's wonderful news. And there's more, Daniel added, barely containing his excitement. Tell her, Rick. They're naming it after you, Rick said, his eyes twinkling. The Margaret Lawson Education Center. Seems your reputation for helping these kids turn their lives around has made an impression on the board. I sank into a dining room chair, overwhelmed. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Grace urged, squeezing my shoulder. You've earned this. Recognition, Margaret. Looking around at the dining room, now fitted with a table long enough to seat our entire extended family of residents, staff, and supporters, I felt a surge of gratitude so powerful it brought tears to my eyes. This room, once the site of Vanessa's cruel power play, had been transformed into a place of nourishing both bodies and spirits. We should call a house meeting to, share the news, I suggested, regaining my composure. The kids have been so involved in the planning, they deserve to hear it first. Within minutes, the living room filled with our residents and staff, 8 teenagers ranging from 14 to 18, our 2 full-time counselors, the night supervisor, and our little administrative family. Daniel stood beside me, his presence solid and reassuring as Rick announced the foundation's decision. Cheers erupted, the loudest coming from Marcus, a 16-year-old who had arrived angry and distrustful 6 months earlier, and now led our peer tutoring program. Does this mean we'll get that music room we talked about? He asked eagerly. And the bigger library? Added Lily, our resident bookworm. Daniel laughed, holding up his hands. Yes, to both. The new funding covers everything in our proposal, plus an emergency fund for future needs. The celebration continued through dinner, the lasagna disappearing amid excited chatter about what the expansion would mean for the home. As I watched the teens interact, supporting, teasing, behaving exactly as any family would, I marveled at how completely my life had transformed since that fateful day in my dining room. Later that evening, after the house had quieted and most residents had retired to their rooms, Daniel found me in James's study, now converted to a comfortable reading nook where I often sat with teens who needed a quiet conversation. Penny for your thoughts, he said, settling into the chair opposite mine. I was just thinking about your father, I admitted. About how he tried to protect me from losing this house, never imagining what it would ultimately become. Daniel nodded, his expression reflective. I think about that too. How Dad's foresight and Vanessa's greed accidentally created something so much bigger than just preserving your home. The irony isn't lost on me, I agreed. If Vanessa hadn't tried to take the house, we might never have reconnected the way we did. This home might never have existed. Speaking of Vanessa, Daniel said carefully, her parole hearing is next month. I studied my son's face, searching for signs of lingering pain. How do you feel about that? He considered the question seriously before answering. Detached, mostly. Like it's happening to someone I used to know. The divorce support group helped a lot with processing everything. The divorce group had been just one aspect of Daniel's healing journey. He'd also reconnected with friends Vanessa had isolated him from, rediscovered hobbies she had discouraged, and even cautiously begun dating again. Most recently Sarah, the foundation director who had championed our expansion grant. And you? He asked. Any residual feelings about Vanessa's potential release? I thought about the woman who had once sneered across my dining room table, threatening to displace me from my home. The anger that had once burned hot had cooled long ago, transformed into something like distant pity. I hope she's used her time to reflect, I said honestly. Beyond that, her life is her own to rebuild, just as we've rebuilt ours. Daniel smiled, reaching across to squeeze my hand. That's what I love about you, Mom. Always looking forward, never back. Not always, I corrected gently. Sometimes looking back helps us appreciate how far we've come. And we had come so far. From the painful isolation Vanessa had created to this vibrant, purposeful community. From Daniel's misguided priorities to his current passionate commitment to helping vulnerable teens. From my quiet widowhood to this rich, meaningful chapter of life I could never have anticipated. The next day dawned clear and crisp, perfect weather for our celebration. The backyard had been transformed with a white tent, rows of chairs, and tables laden with food and photographs, documenting our journey from family home to the James Lawson Home for Teens. As guests arrived, neighbors, supporters, social workers, former residents now in college, I retreated briefly to my bedroom to collect my thoughts before the ceremony. On my dresser sat the framed letter from James that Rick had delivered 2 years earlier. I touched it gently, drawing strength from the connection to the man who had loved me enough to protect me even after he was gone. The ceremony began at noon, with Daniel welcoming everyone and sharing the story of how the home came to be, tactfully omitting Vanessa's name, but acknowledging the life changes that had led to our new direction. The teens performed a song they had written specifically for the occasion, their young voices blending in harmony that brought tears to many eyes. Then it was my turn to speak. I approached the podium set up, beneath the maple tree, its autumn glory providing a canopy of gold above the gathering. 2 years ago, I began, looking out at the faces of people who had become my extended family. This house stood at a crossroads. For 30 years, it had been a family home, sheltering first my husband, son, and me, and later just Daniel and me after James's passing. It had served its purpose faithfully, protecting us through life's storms. I paused, gathering my thoughts. But houses, like people, sometimes need new purpose to truly thrive. The James Lawson home grew from a simple realization that the protection I had been given could be extended to others who needed it even more desperately. My gaze found Zoe in the front row, sitting tall and proud in her new role as resident assistant. Beside her sat Marcus, Lily, and the other teens who had found safety within our walls. In the past 2 years, 17 young people have called this place home. Some stayed for a few months, others are still here. Each brought their own gifts, their own challenges, their own unique light. And each has taught me that family isn't defined by blood, but by choice. The daily choice to support, encourage, and believe in one another. Daniel nodded encouragingly as I continued. Today, as we celebrate our 2nd anniversary and break ground on the Margaret Lawson Education Center, a name I accept with humility and gratitude, I am reminded of something my late husband once told me. A house is made of walls and beams. A home is made of love and dreams. I gestured to the teens seated before me. These young people have dreams worth supporting. Their futures are bright with possibility. And the love in this home, given and received freely without condition, is the true foundation upon which everything else stands. Grace dabbed at her eyes with a tissue as I concluded. James protected this house so that it could one day protect others. That vision has been fulfilled beyond anything we could have imagined. As we break ground today, we're not just expanding our physical space. We're expanding our capacity to offer what every young person deserves: a safe place to grow, to fail, to succeed, and to become who they are meant to be. After the ceremony, as guests mingled beneath the tent and the teens proudly gave tours of their home, I found myself alone for a moment near James's favorite rose garden. The autumn sun warmed my face as I closed my eyes, feeling an overwhelming sense of rightness. He would be so proud, Rick said quietly, joining me with 2 glasses of champagne. Of the home, of Daniel, but mostly of you. I accepted the glass, clinking it gently against his. For seeing it through, for turning adversity into opportunity, Rick corrected. For recognizing that sometimes protection isn't about keeping things the same, but about creating space for growth and change. As we sipped our champagne, Daniel approached with Sarah beside him, both smiling widely. The donors are impressed, Daniel reported. 2 more foundations want to discuss funding additional homes in neighboring counties. Additional homes? I echoed, surprised. You mean beyond our expansion? Sarah nodded enthusiastically. The model you've created here, a home-like environment with professional support, focusing on older teens transitioning to independence, it's filling a critical gap in the system. There's interest in replicating it. I looked from Sarah to Daniel, seeing the excitement in their eyes. That would be amazing, but also a much bigger undertaking than anything we've done so far. We don't have to decide today, Daniel assured me, but it's something to consider. A chance to extend what we've started here. As they moved away to greet more guests, I gazed at the house that had sheltered so many lives, including my own. Its Victorian lines stood proud against the autumn sky, the building itself seemingly rejuvenated by its new purpose. From a simple protective clause in a deed, James's final act of love had grown something far greater than either of us could have imagined. A home not just for me, not just for Daniel, but for young people who needed exactly what we had to offer: stability, guidance, and unconditional acceptance. Vanessa had tried to take this house from me, seeing it only as valuable property to be exploited. In her greed, she had inadvertently set in motion a transformation that had enriched countless lives, including, ironically, her ex-husband's. The teens had gathered beneath the maple tree for a group photo, their faces alight with belonging. Daniel stood among them, his arm around Zoe's shoulders as she smiled more freely than she had when she first arrived. Grace directed the photographer, while Rick watched from nearby, pride evident in his weathered face. This was my family now, expanded, diverse, bound not by blood but by choice and commitment. The house had protected me when I needed protection most. Now it protected others, its walls absorbing new stories, its rooms witnessing new growth. As I moved to join the group beneath the tree that had stood sentinel through all the seasons of my life, I felt a deep sense of peace settle over me. The house of cards Vanessa had tried to build had long since collapsed, but our home, built on love, strengthened through adversity, and now dedicated to creating new beginnings, stood more solid than ever. James had known somehow that the true value of our home lay not in its market worth, but in its capacity to shelter dreams. His protection had preserved that potential until the moment was right for transformation. And in that transformation, we had all found purpose greater than we could have imagined. The future stretched before us, bright with possibility. Whatever challenges it held, we would face them together, not as individuals standing alone, but as a family bound by choice, commitment, and love. After all, that was what made AY's house truly a home.